I always prided myself on being a trusting husband. For the past 8 years, my wife, Claire, and I had built a life together, one filled with quiet nights, shared laughter, and the kind of comfort that comes from truly knowing another person. Or at least, that's what I thought. It started subtly, almost too small to notice. Her book club meetings, which used to be predictable gatherings of wine-sipping and literary discussion, started running later into the night. At first, it was an extra 30 minutes, then an hour. Eventually, Claire would return home past midnight, her cheeks flushed, her voice just a little too light as she kissed me on the forehead and whispered, "It went long, you know how we get." And I did know. Or at least, I thought I did. Claire had always been an avid reader, so when she joined the book club with a few neighborhood women, it made sense. She'd come home gushing about characters, plot twists, and dramatic debates over whether a book's ending had been satisfying. I loved hearing her talk about it. I loved that she had something of her own, something that made her eyes sparkle. But lately, that sparkle had started to seem different. It wasn't just the late nights. It was the way she started dressing up more, picking out outfits with care for just the girls. The way she'd spritz perfume on her wrists before leaving, something she never used to do for book club. The way she'd glance at her phone, smiling at messages she never shared. Still, I ignored it. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. Until one night, when I saw something I couldn't ignore. Claire was in the shower, humming to herself, steam curling out from under the bathroom door. Her phone sat on the nightstand, buzzing with a notification. I didn't mean to look. I really didn't. But my eyes flicked toward the screen anyway, catching the preview of a message. "Can't wait for tonight. Same place." A strange feeling settled in my chest. The sender's name wasn't familiar, and the message wasn't particularly incriminating. But it was off. It wasn't about a book. I told myself not to read into it. But the feeling stayed. That night, as Claire got ready for book club, I paid closer attention than ever before. She chose a dress she hadn't worn in months, one that hugged her in just the right places. She styled her hair, checked her reflection twice. I leaned against the doorway, watching her. "You look nice." She glanced at me in the mirror, smiling. "Thanks, love. We're meeting at Melanie's house tonight. Hosting rotation and all that." I nodded. "What book are you guys discussing?" She hesitated for half a second. Just a flicker, a moment I might have missed if I hadn't been looking. "Still working through The Silent Wife," she said smoothly. I knew that wasn't true. I'd seen the book sitting on her nightstand, untouched for weeks. Something wasn't right. And for the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge it. I had to find out the truth. The moment Claire walked out the door, I felt the weight of my suspicion settle over me like a heavy fog. I wasn't the type to be paranoid. I wasn't the jealous husband who jumped at shadows. But something about the way she hesitated before answering me, something about that unread book on her nightstand, wouldn't let me shake the feeling that I was being lied to. I sat on the couch for a long while, staring at my phone, debating my next move. I could ignore it. I could trust her, let it go, and pretend I hadn't noticed the inconsistencies. But the message on her phone echoed in my mind. "Can't wait for tonight. Same place." What place? What was I really afraid of? That she was lying? That she was meeting someone else? Or was I afraid of finding out that my wife, the woman I had loved and trusted for years, was capable of deception? I didn't want to believe it. But I needed to know. And so, for the first time in my marriage, I did something I had never done before. I grabbed my jacket, slid into my car, and followed her. Claire's car was easy to spot in the evening traffic, the sleek silver sedan she had fallen in love with at the dealership gleaming under the streetlights. She drove casually, unhurried. I followed at a safe distance, my heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. I expected her to drive straight to Melanie's house. After all, that was what she told me, wasn't it? Instead, she took an unexpected turn, heading toward the other side of town. I gripped the steering wheel, watching as she navigated through the streets with purpose, never once hesitating. This wasn't an accidental detour. She knew exactly where she was going. Then, she pulled into a dimly lit parking lot behind a quiet little cafe. I slowed my car, heart hammering as I parked a few spots away. Why here? I watched as she stepped out of the car, adjusting her dress, checking her reflection in the window. Then she walked toward a side entrance, her posture relaxed, confident. No hesitation. No looking around nervously, no glancing over her shoulder. This wasn't the behavior of someone sneaking around in fear of being caught. It was the behavior of someone who had done this before. I took a breath, forcing myself to think. I couldn't just storm in there and demand answers. I needed to see. To know for sure. So I got out of the car. The side entrance led to a small, private event space within the cafe. As I slipped inside, I kept my distance, scanning the room. There they were. Claire, sitting at a round table with 5 other women, all of whom I recognized. I had seen them before. Neighbors, acquaintances, friends of my wife. They were chatting, sipping wine, laughing softly. For a brief moment, my stomach unclenched. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe I had let my imagination run wild. Maybe this really was just a book club that happened to meet at a different location tonight. Then, the door at the far end of the room opened. A group of men entered. Not husbands. Not familiar faces. Strangers. I felt a cold, creeping sensation wash over me as I watched the scene unfold. The women's smiles widened. Their voices dropped into softer tones. One by one, they greeted the men, some with a casual touch on the arm, others with lingering embraces. Claire stood up, walking toward a tall, dark-haired man who greeted her with a slow smile. She laughed at something he said, resting a hand on his chest. My vision blurred. It wasn't a book club. It had never been a book club. This was something else entirely. I couldn't move. I should have stormed in. I should have made a scene, demanded answers, called her name, anything. But instead, I stood frozen, watching as my wife leaned in close to a man I had never seen before, whispering something in his ear. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew what they meant. This wasn't innocent. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Claire was here for him. For them. For this. I swallowed against the tightness in my throat, gripping the doorframe for support. Every part of me screamed to act, but a quieter, more rational voice inside held me back. If I walked in now, I'd be operating on pure emotion. I needed clarity. Proof. I needed to know exactly what was going on. So I took out my phone and started recording. I captured the way the women interacted with the men, the way drinks were poured, the way laughter turned softer, more intimate. I focused on Claire, the way she looked at him, the way she touched his arm. Then, I turned and walked out. Because in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. My marriage was over. But I wasn't going to let it end without answers. Or without consequences. I don't remember driving home. I must have, obviously. I ended up back in our house, standing in the living room, my hands trembling as I set my phone down on the coffee table. But the drive itself was a blur, my mind consumed by the scene I had just witnessed. Claire. My wife. The woman I had trusted for 8 years. Meeting another man. Touching him. Laughing with him. And not just her, the entire group of women. Their book club had been nothing more than a cover, a flimsy excuse for secret rendezvous. I sat down on the couch, staring at my phone, the video still playing silently on the screen. My fingers curled into fists. I could barely bring myself to watch it again. But I had to. I needed to see. So I pressed play. The footage was clear, even in the dim lighting of the cafe. Claire, smiling in that way she used to smile at me, standing too close to that man. The way she laughed at something he whispered. The way her fingers trailed lightly down his arm. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep watching. In the background, the other women did the same. A few leaned in for kisses. Another sat in a man's lap. A private gathering, hidden away from the world. I swallowed hard. They weren't even trying to be careful. They were comfortable. Like this had been going on for a long time. I let the video play until the end, my stomach twisting. The final frame showed Claire and her friend slipping away toward a back hallway. A hallway that led somewhere. Somewhere I didn't want to imagine. My hands were still shaking when I finally turned the video off. This wasn't just a one-time thing. This wasn't some mistake. some moment of weakness. This was planned. This was routine. Every single time Claire had told me she was going to book club, she had really been going to him. And I had been sitting at home like a fool, thinking she was discussing novels and drinking wine with friends. A wave of anger surged through me so suddenly, so intensely, that I had to stand up and pace. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't breathe properly. How long had this been going on? Who was this guy? Did her friends' husbands know? The questions swarmed my mind like a storm, each one hitting harder than the last. And yet, beneath the rage and the betrayal, a single thought rose to the surface. I couldn't let her get away with this. Confronting her now, storming into our bedroom and demanding the truth, would be satisfying. But it wouldn't be smart. Claire was a smooth talker. She had always been good at twisting situations, at making herself seem like the reasonable one. If I burst in and accused her outright, she'd deny it. She'd gaslight me. She'd make me look like the paranoid, controlling husband. No. I needed to be careful. I needed to make sure everyone knew the truth. And not just Claire, I wanted the other women exposed, too. Because if my wife was capable of this, then who's to say the others weren't hiding just as much from their husbands? I grabbed my phone again, replaying the video, my mind working quickly. Step 1. Get more proof. The video I had was good, but it wasn't enough. I needed solid, undeniable evidence. Step 2. Find out who the men were. If Claire had been lying to me, then the others had been lying to their husbands, too. I needed names. Step 3. Hit them where it hurts. This wasn't just about exposing Claire. It was about making sure she and her friends faced the full weight of their deception. I didn't want just an argument. I wanted the truth laid bare for everyone to see. And I knew exactly how to do it. I waited. When Claire finally came home, it was nearly 1 a.m. The sound of the door unlocking jolted me out of my thoughts. I was still on the couch, pretending to be half asleep, watching as she stepped inside. She was careful, quiet, like she didn't want to wake me. I forced myself to stay calm, to act normal. She set her purse down, slipped off her shoes, then made her way toward the bedroom. I let her get all the way down the hall before I called out. "How was book club?" Claire froze. For a split second, she didn't answer. Then, smoothly, she turned back toward me, her face composed. "It was good. Long discussion tonight." I studied her, my heart pounding. "Liar." "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice casual. "What book did you guys read?" She hesitated. Just for a second. But I caught it. Then she smiled. "The Paris Library." I nodded. "Oh. I thought you were still reading The Silent Wife." Something flickered in her expression. She recovered quickly. "We finished that last week." We switched. I nodded again, biting my tongue. Every word out of her mouth was a lie. And I let her say them. Because the longer she lied, the more confident she felt. The more confident she felt, the easier it would be to trap her. Over the next few days, I played along. I didn't confront her. I didn't give any indication that I knew. Instead, I started digging. I checked her messages whenever she left her phone unattended. I took note of unfamiliar numbers. I watched her more closely than ever, looking for patterns, routines, details she might have overlooked. And then, after gathering everything I needed, I made my move. I reached out to the other husbands. Because I wasn't the only one being deceived. And if Claire thought she could get away with this, she was about to learn a very, very painful lesson. I had spent the past few days carefully piecing together the truth, and the deeper I dug, the worse it became. Claire wasn't just meeting this man once in a while. This had been happening for months. And it wasn't just her. Every single one of those women had been deceiving their husbands, using their so-called book club as a cover. And now, I had the proof to prove it. I wasn't sure how to approach them at first. It's not every day you call up another man and tell him his wife has been cheating on him. But this wasn't something I could handle alone. If I was going to expose this, it had to be all of us standing together. So I started with the one I trusted most, Mark. Mark was a solid guy, the kind of man you could count on. He and his wife, Rachel, had been friends with Claire and me for years. If anyone deserved to know, it was him. I waited until Claire had left for work before dialing his number. "Hey man," he answered, sounding cheerful. "What's up?" I hesitated, gripping my phone tightly. "Mark, I need to talk to you about something. And it's not good." The change in his tone was immediate. "What's wrong?" "Rachel," I said carefully. "And Claire. And the rest of the book club." A pause. "What about them?" I took a deep breath. "They're lying to us. It's not a book club." Silence. Then, a forced laugh. "Jake, come on. I have proof." Another pause. This time, longer. "What kind of proof?" "Videos. Messages. Locations." I exhaled. "They've been meeting men. Every time they say they're going to book club, they're actually, you know." I didn't need to say the words. Mark didn't respond at first. Then, his voice dropped into something cold and sharp. "Send me what you have." I did. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice tight. "I suspected it last week. I followed Claire and found out everything a few nights ago." A heavy breath. Then, "Who else have you told?" "No one yet. I wanted to start with you." Another pause. Then, a quiet, deadly statement. "We need to tell the others." And just like that, it had begun. By the end of the day, we had a small alliance. Mark had reached out to David, whose wife, Sophie, was also in the group. David had been blindsided, completely unaware, but once he saw the evidence, the fire in his voice told me he wasn't going to take it lying down. Then there was Ethan, whose wife, Melanie, had been Claire's closest friend. Out of all of us, he had been the most reluctant to believe it, until Mark showed him the video. After that, he went silent for a long time. Then, what do we do? And that was the question, wasn't it? We had the truth. We had the proof. Now, it was time to expose them. We decided it had to be public. Claire and the others had lied to us in secret for months, but we weren't going to let them weasel their way out of this with more excuses. We needed to confront them all together, in a way they couldn't deny. And the best way to do that? At their next book club meeting. It was risky. If even one of them got wind of what we were planning, they might cancel or change locations. But we had one advantage. None of them had any idea that we knew. So we let them believe they were safe. We pretended things were normal. We acted the way we always did. And when Friday night rolled around, Claire kissed me goodbye like she always did, promising she wouldn't be too late. I smiled. Have fun. She had no idea what was coming. Mark, David, Ethan, and I met up a few blocks away from the cafe. We had a plan. David would handle getting us inside. Mark had arranged for one of the cafe's employees to unlock the private event space for us. Ethan was in charge of recording everything, because if any of them tried to deny what was happening, we wanted proof. And me? I was going to walk straight up to Claire and look her in the eyes when I exposed her for who she really was. We arrived at the cafe just as their meeting was getting started. Through the glass windows, we could see them sitting at their table, wine glasses in hand, smiling and laughing, completely unaware. Then, right on cue, the door at the back of the room opened. The men arrived. I saw Claire's face light up. I felt the heat rise in my chest. Then I heard Mark say, "Let's go." And we walked inside. The second we stepped into the room, everything stopped. The laughter died. The smiles faded. Claire turned her head, still mid-conversation with her lover, and saw me standing there. Her face drained of color. "Jake," she said, like she couldn't believe I was real. I held up my phone, playing the very same video I had recorded days before. Laughter. Whispered words. Hands brushing. The slow intimacy of something hidden but never truly secret. The other women gasped. The men looked around in confusion. Mark spoke first. "Rachel," he said, his voice as sharp as ice. "Who the hell is this?" Rachel's mouth opened and closed, her hands gripping the table. "Mark, I can explain." "No," David interrupted, turning to Sophie. "No more explanations. No more lies. He pointed to the man beside her. "Who is this?" The silence was suffocating. I turned back to Claire. She was staring at me like a deer caught in headlights. "Say something," I told her. "Tell me you didn't lie to me. Tell me you didn't come here every week and betray me." Her mouth opened, then closed. She had nothing to say. Ethan took a step forward, his phone raised, recording every second. "I think everyone watching this video deserves to know what's been going on here. And I'm guessing your friends' husbands would be interested, too." Sophie let out a strangled noise. "You wouldn't." David turned to her. "Wouldn't I?" And just like that, the perfect little world they had built for themselves shattered. Rachel broke first, covering her face with her hands, sobbing. Melanie tried to deny it, but Ethan silenced her with one word: proof. And Claire? She just stared at me. Frozen. Silent. For the first time in her life, she had no way to manipulate the situation. No way to lie her way out. Because the truth was standing in front of her. And I wasn't going anywhere. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence. It stretched across the room like a heavy fog, wrapping around each person as the weight of the truth crashed down. No one moved. No one spoke. The air crackled with tension as Claire and the other women sat frozen, their faces drained of color, their eyes darting between us, their husbands, and the men they had been meeting in secret. I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat, steady and hard, like a war drum. And then, Claire finally spoke. "Jake, I can explain." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Can you?" She flinched. Across the table, Rachel started crying. "Mark, please." Mark held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Not another word." His voice was steel, his expression unreadable. "Not another damn word." David turned to Sophie, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might break. "Who is he?" he asked, pointing at the man beside her. "Just his name." Sophie swallowed hard, glancing at the man, as if hoping he would save her. He didn't. He just sat there, frozen, like a kid caught stealing candy. "David, please," she whispered. "His name." Tears welled in her eyes. "Eric." David nodded, his face darkening. "Eric. Great. Nice to meet you, Eric. Do you have a wife?" Eric's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I'll take that as a yes," David said, his tone sharp as a knife. Sophie reached for him, but he pulled away. "Don't," he snapped. Melanie, who had been quiet this whole time, finally spoke up. "This is ridiculous. You're all blowing this out of proportion." Ethan turned to her so fast she practically shrank into her chair. "Out of proportion," he repeated, voice cold. Melanie crossed her arms. "It's not like we were sneaking around behind your backs." "You were sneaking around," Ethan interrupted, his voice rising. "You lied to us, week after week." Rachel sobbed harder. "We never meant to hurt you." "Then why did you?" Mark's voice was eerily calm, his hands clenched at his sides. "Why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you tell us instead of lying over and over again?" No one had an answer. Because there was no answer. They had done this because they wanted to. Because they thought they could get away with it. Claire looked back at me, her blue eyes glassy with unshed tears. "Jake, I swear, it wasn't." I held up my phone and hit play. Her voice echoed through the room. Laughter. Whispered words. The soft, intimate way she had spoken to another man. There was no denying it. She had done this. They all had. And now, they were finally facing the consequences. David stepped back from Sophie, shaking his head in disgust. "I'm done," he muttered. "I can't even look at you." Sophie gasped, her face crumpling. "David, no." He turned on his heel and walked out. Just like that. Ethan wasn't far behind. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and started typing. "What are you doing?" Melanie asked, panic creeping into her voice. "Texting your brother," Ethan said without looking up. "So he can help you pack your stuff. You're not coming home with me." Melanie paled. Mark took a deep breath, exhaled sharply, then pointed at Rachel. "You and I." We're done. Rachel let out a small, broken sound. Mark, please, No, his voice was final. I'll send you the divorce papers. She burst into fresh tears, but he didn't spare her another glance. He turned and followed David out the door. And then it was just me and Claire. She stared at me, her hands gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Jake," she whispered, "please. Just let me explain." I folded my arms. "Go ahead." She blinked, caught off guard. "What? You want to explain?" I said coolly. "Then explain." She swallowed hard. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. It wasn't serious. It was just an escape." I raised an eyebrow. "An escape?" She nodded quickly, like she was desperate for me to understand. "It wasn't about you. It was never about you. Things got routine, and I needed something different, something exciting, and—" I held up a hand. "Let me get this straight. You got bored, so instead of talking to me, instead of trying to work on our marriage, you decided to sneak around behind my back and lie to me for months." She flinched. I shook my head. "You didn't just betray me, Claire. You made a fool of me. You made me trust you. You kissed me goodbye, looked me in the eyes, and told me you loved me, while you were sneaking off to be with someone else." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I do love you." I laughed bitterly. "No, you don't." Her face crumpled. "Jake, please. We can fix this." I stared at her, feeling nothing but emptiness. "I don't want to fix this," I said quietly. Her eyes widened. "You don't mean that." I exhaled sharply, my chest tightening. "I do." The truth was, I had already mourned our marriage. The moment I saw her with him, something inside me had broken beyond repair. There was no fixing this. No going back. Claire reached for my hand, but I stepped away. "I'll be filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. She let out a choked sob. "Jake, I'll send you a message when I decide how we're going to split things. You can stay in the house for now, but I want you gone by the end of the month." Her lips trembled. "You're really leaving me?" I stared at her. And then, with a quiet finality, I said, "You left me first." Then I turned and walked out the door. Claire didn't follow me. She didn't say anything else. And that was the moment I knew, really, truly knew, that this was over. For good. The night I walked out of that cafe, I felt nothing. No relief. No rage. No sadness. Just an overwhelming emptiness, like something inside me had been scooped out and discarded. For 8 years, Claire had been my partner, my best friend, the person I had built a life with. And in a single night, I had watched that life collapse, revealing a foundation of lies I never even realized I was standing on. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Every now and then, my mind would try to pull me back, to the way Claire had looked at me, the tears in her eyes, the way her voice cracked when she begged me to stay. But I shut those thoughts down before they could take root. She had already made her choice. And now, I was making mine. The next morning, Claire wasn't home. Maybe she had gone to stay with a friend. Maybe she had just needed to escape. Either way, I was grateful for the empty house. I couldn't stay here. Every inch of this place felt tainted. Our bedroom, where she had kissed me good night after sneaking around. The kitchen, where we had shared meals while she pretended nothing was wrong. I needed to get out. I spent the next few hours packing my things. I didn't take much, just the essentials. Clothes, important documents, a few sentimental items. Everything else, I didn't care. By the time Claire finally came home, the living room was filled with packed bags. She stopped in the doorway, eyes widening. "You're really leaving?" I zipped up the last suitcase. "Yeah." She stepped forward hesitantly, like she was afraid to get too close. "Jake, please. Don't do this." I met her gaze. "You already did this." Tears welled in her eyes. "I made a mistake." I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. "It wasn't a mistake, Claire. It was a choice. Over and over again." She bit her lip, shoulders shaking. "I still love you." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since everything came crashing down. This was the woman I had once adored. The woman I had imagined a future with. And now she was just someone I used to know. "I don't believe you," I said simply. Her face crumpled. I didn't stay to watch her cry. I picked up my bags, walked past her, and stepped out the door. I didn't look back. Not once. Word spread quickly. The husbands had all left their wives. Some filed for divorce immediately. Others took a few weeks to process before making their decisions. But in the end, not a single marriage survived. The fallout was brutal. Rachel tried to win Mark back, swearing she'd never do anything like this again. But Mark didn't even entertain the idea. He packed up his things and left, and within weeks, their home was up for sale. David moved out of his house the same night I did. I ran into him a few weeks later at a bar, where we sat in silence for a while before he finally muttered, "I don't even know who I was married to." Ethan's divorce was the messiest. Melanie tried to twist the narrative, claiming we had all overreacted, that it was just harmless fun. But the evidence was undeniable. She lost nearly all of her friends, and from what I heard, she eventually moved out of town. As for Claire, she tried to reach out. At first, it was little things, a text here, a call there. Then, when I didn't respond, the messages grew desperate. "I miss you. Please, can we talk? I don't know how to do this without you." I never answered. Because the truth was, I did know how to do this without her. And I was doing just fine. The weeks turned into months. I moved into a new apartment, one that wasn't haunted by memories of betrayal. I focused on work. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, friends Claire had subtly distanced me from over time. And slowly, the weight in my chest began to lift. One night, I was out with Mark and David when Mark suddenly smirked, nudging my arm. "There's a girl at the bar checking you out," he said. I followed his gaze. She was pretty. Long dark hair, bright green eyes. When our eyes met, she smiled. For a split second, something inside me hesitated. Then I realized, this was the first time in years that I could do this. I wasn't tied down. I wasn't waiting for someone who had already let me go. I smiled back. And just like that, I started moving forward. 6 months later, I ran into Claire. It was an accident. I was grabbing coffee when I heard someone say my name. I turned and saw her standing a few feet away, looking hesitant. She looked different. Tired. Thinner. Not in a healthy way, but in the way someone looks when life has been unkind. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then, softly, she said, "Hey." I nodded. "Hey." She hesitated. She swallowed. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I studied her carefully. Months ago, I had needed this. I had needed an apology, a confession, something to justify all the pain she had put me through. But standing here now, looking at her, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I had already moved on. I nodded. "I know." She blinked. "You do." I smiled slightly. "Yeah." She exhaled, looking down at her hands. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "I already have," I said. She looked up sharply, searching my face for any sign of sarcasm or bitterness. But there was none. Because I meant it. Forgiving her didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean excusing what she had done. It meant I was done carrying it. She nodded slowly, as if she finally understood. "I hope you're happy." I smiled. "I am." And I was. She gave me one last lingering look before turning and walking away. I watched her go, waiting for some kind of emotion to hit me, sadness, anger, nostalgia. But there was nothing. Nothing except a quiet, unshakable truth. I had won. Not because I had exposed her. Not because I had destroyed her perfect little world. But because I had let go. And in the end, that was the best closure I could have ever asked for.